In the small, sleepy town of Oakwood, Illinois, the old Bradford House had stood vacant for decades. The two-story Victorian had once been the pride of the neighborhood, but as time passed, its grandeur faded, replaced by creeping ivy and peeling paint. The townsfolk whispered about the house's dark past, but those tales were more hushed rumors than anything substantial, until the Johnson family moved in. The Johnsons were a young couple, Claire and David, with a toddler named Lily. They had recently relocated to Oakwood for David's new job and saw the Bradford house as an opportunity to start fresh. They were enchanted by the house's old-world charm, its spacious rooms, and the large, wraparound porch. The real estate agent had mentioned the house's history but framed it as nothing more than colorful local lore. The first night in the Bradford house, Claire and David were unsettled by a faint, persistent tapping sound. They dismissed it as the house settling or perhaps a branch against the window. But as days went by, the tapping grew louder, always seeming to come from the attic. They tried to ignore it, focusing instead on making the house their home. As autumn rolled in, the tapping intensified, now accompanied by whispers that seemed to drift through the walls. Lily, who had always been a cheerful child, began having night terrors and refused to sleep in her room. She claimed that the lady in the attic wanted to play with her. Concerned but skeptical, Claire and David decided to investigate. They made their way up to the attic, which had been untouched since they moved in. The attic was dusty and filled with old furniture and boxes. As they sorted through the clutter, David noticed an old trunk in the corner, half hidden behind a stack of moth-eaten blankets. Curiosity piqued, David opened the trunk. Inside, he found an assortment of old clothing, yellowed photographs, and a small, ornate mirror. The mirror was unusual, its frame intricately carved with designs that seemed almost alive. It had a tarnished, but still reflective, surface. Claire, intrigued, cleaned the mirror and hung it in their bedroom. That night, the tapping turned into a pounding, and Claire awoke to a cold draft in their bedroom. The mirror, which had been hanging straight, was now tilted at a strange angle. Claire, feeling uneasy, got up to straighten it, but as she approached, she saw a shadowy figure in the mirror's reflection, a woman in a Victorian dress with hollow eyes staring back at her. Claire recoiled in terror and woke David. Together, they stared at the mirror, but the figure was gone. They decided it was a figment of their imagination, born from exhaustion and the unsettling history of the house. The next day, Claire and David learned from a local historian that the Bradford house had once belonged to the Bradford family, who had mysteriously vanished in the late 1800s. The last family member, a woman named Elizabeth, was known for her obsession with the mirror, which was said to be a gift from her late husband. Elizabeth was rumored to have gone mad, searching for her missing family through that very mirror. As the days turned to weeks, the haunting presence grew more malevolent. The tapping became furious pounding, and the whispers turned into anguished cries. Lily continued to have nightmares, insisting that Elizabeth wanted to take her away. Desperate, Claire and David contacted a local paranormal investigator. The investigator, after spending a night in the house, confirmed their fears. The mirror was a conduit, drawing the restless spirit of Elizabeth, who was trapped between this world and the next, longing for her lost family and tormenting anyone who dared to occupy her home. With heavy hearts, Claire and David decided to leave the Bradford house. They packed their belongings and left under the cover of night, taking only what they could carry. The house, once again vacant, stood in silence, its secrets buried deep within its walls. The Bradford house remains empty to this day, its windows dark and unwelcoming. The tapping and the whispers have ceased, but the locals say that on certain nights, when the moonlight hits just right, the shadowy figure of Elizabeth can be seen gazing out from the attic window, forever waiting for the family that never returned. Months passed since the Johnsons left the Bradford house, and life in Oakwood returned to its quiet normalcy. The house, however, remained a source of fascination and fear for the townsfolk. Rumors about its haunting continued to circulate, and it became a sort of eerie local legend. One chilly November evening, a group of college friends from Chicago, fascinated by the supernatural and in search of a thrill, decided to visit the Bradford house. They were a mix of skeptics and believers, and their plan was to spend a night in the old mansion to document their experience. Among them was Sarah, an aspiring filmmaker with a keen interest in ghost stories. She brought along her camera, determined to capture any paranormal activity on film. The group arrived at the house just as twilight turned to night. The Bradford house loomed before them, its darkened windows like hollow eyes watching their every move. As they entered the house, the air felt colder, and the once faint sense of unease seemed to solidify. The friends set up their equipment in the living room and began their investigation. They split up to cover more ground, each armed with flashlights, cameras, and digital voice recorders. Sarah ventured up to the attic, drawn by a peculiar instinct. The attic, once filled with clutter, was now strangely empty, save for the old trunk and the mirror. The mirror, which had been removed and stored away by the Johnsons, was now back in its place, as if it had never been touched. As Sarah approached the mirror, she felt a shiver run down her spine. She started recording, speaking softly, asking if there were any spirits present. The room fell eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of the house settling. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply. Sarah's breath became visible as she continued to speak into the camera. Then, she noticed a shadow flickering in the mirror's reflection. It was faint at first, but it grew clearer, revealing a ghostly figure. The figure was a woman in a Victorian dress, her face pale and eyes sunken. Panicked but determined, Sarah asked the figure, "Who are you? What do you want?" The reflection seemed to shift, the woman's hand reaching out as if trying to touch the mirror's surface. The other friends, hearing Sarah's distress, rushed up to the attic. When they arrived, they saw the mirror glowing faintly, casting a ghostly light on the walls. Sarah was pale and trembling, her camera still recording. The ghostly woman in the mirror had disappeared, leaving only an oppressive silence. Determined to uncover more, Sarah and her friends researched the house's history. They learned about Elizabeth Bradford's tragic fate and how her obsession with the mirror had consumed her. They discovered that Elizabeth had been deeply in love with her husband, who had vanished under mysterious circumstances, leaving her with nothing but despair and madness. Feeling a sense of duty, Sarah decided to contact the local historian who had previously helped the Johnsons. The historian revealed that the mirror was believed to be cursed, a conduit not only for Elizabeth's spirit but also for the despair she had felt. The mirror had bound her to the house, feeding off the anguish of those who encountered it. Sarah and her friends realized that Elizabeth's spirit was trapped, unable to find peace until her story was told and her suffering acknowledged. They made a plan to honor Elizabeth's memory and hopefully help her find peace. They organized a small memorial service for Elizabeth at the local cemetery where the Bradford family was buried. They spoke of Elizabeth's tragic love and her relentless search for her missing family. After the memorial, the haunting activity in the Bradford house diminished. The mirror was carefully packed and donated to a museum specializing in paranormal artifacts. The Bradford house, though still standing, was no longer the subject of nightly terror. It seemed that by acknowledging Elizabeth's pain and sharing her story, a measure of peace had been restored. To this day, the Bradford house remains a landmark in Oakwood, its history remembered but no longer feared. The mirror, now safely preserved, serves as a reminder of the haunting past and the enduring quest for peace, not just for the living but for those trapped between worlds. And sometimes, when the moon is full and the wind howls through the trees, the locals still speak of the figure they once saw in the attic window. A woman who, at last, might have finally found a semblance of rest. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you like this story. Years passed since the mirror was removed from the Bradford house and Elizabeth's story was brought to light. The town of Oakwood had gradually returned to its peaceful rhythm. The Bradford house, now a quiet relic of the past, was still watched over with a respectful distance. Most townsfolk had come to view it as just another old building, albeit with an intriguing history. However, the peace was not to last forever. In the early spring of the following year, a young woman named Emily Parker moved to Oakwood. She was an avid historian with a particular interest in local legends and historical curiosities. Emily had recently finished her degree in history and was eager to dive into the mysteries of small-town America. When she heard about the Bradford house and its eerie reputation, she saw an opportunity to delve into an unsolved historical mystery. Emily rented a small house on the outskirts of town and began her research into the Bradford family. She pored over old newspapers, diaries, and letters in the town's archive. The more she learned, the more she became fascinated with Elizabeth's story. She was determined to uncover any remaining secrets the Bradford house might hold, hoping to piece together the complete history of the vanished family. One rainy evening, Emily decided to visit the Bradford house. It was an overcast day, and the clouds cast long, shifting shadows over the decaying facade of the mansion. Emily, armed with a flashlight and her notebook, approached the house with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She had been given permission by the town council to explore the house as part of her research. As she stepped inside, the air was musty but still held a faint hint of the past, a scent of old wood and forgotten times. Emily started in the living room, documenting her surroundings. She then made her way up to the attic, where the mirror had once been. The attic was now empty and bare, devoid of the eerie presence that had once plagued the house. Emily's curiosity led her to search through the remaining items in the attic, hoping to find something overlooked by previous investigators. She found a small, dust-covered box in the corner, tucked away behind some old furniture. Inside the box were a few personal items: a locket, a collection of letters, and a diary with a faded cover. Her heart raced as she carefully opened the diary. The handwriting was delicate but legible, revealing entries from Elizabeth herself. The diary was a chronicle of Elizabeth's life, her deep love for her husband, and her growing despair as he went missing. The final entries were filled with anguish, revealing Elizabeth's growing belief that her husband was trapped somewhere, unable to return to her. One entry stood out. It spoke of a final, desperate plan. Elizabeth had discovered a way to communicate with her husband through the mirror. She had found a ritual, a last attempt to contact him and bring him back. The entry ended abruptly with a final, cryptic sentence: "The mirror holds the key." Emily was intrigued. The diary hinted at a ritual, but the specifics were missing. She decided to investigate further, believing that the mirror might still hold secrets that had not yet been uncovered. Emily's research led her to old occult texts and rituals associated with mirrors and spirits. She found a pattern, a way to open a temporary portal to the spirit world, allowing communication between the living and the dead. Armed with this knowledge, she returned to the Bradford house, intent on performing the ritual described in the diary. That night, Emily set up the ritual in the attic, using items she had gathered and the information from Elizabeth's diary. She positioned the mirror carefully, arranging candles and reciting the incantations from the texts. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as she completed the ritual. As the candles flickered and the air grew colder, Emily stared into the mirror. For a moment, the reflection seemed normal. Then, the surface began to ripple, and a shadowy figure appeared: Elizabeth Bradford, her face twisted with both hope and sorrow. Emily spoke softly, asking Elizabeth about her missing family and what had happened to them. Elizabeth's spirit seemed to respond, though her words were distorted and fragmented. Through the haze, Emily could make out snippets of a story, a tale of betrayal and hidden secrets. Elizabeth's husband had not vanished of his own accord. He had been taken away by someone close, someone who had hoped to claim Elizabeth's wealth and position. As the conversation continued, Elizabeth's spirit became more agitated, her desperation palpable. Emily realized that Elizabeth had not just been searching for her husband but had also been wronged by those she trusted. The mirror had trapped her in a cycle of torment, unable to move on until her story was fully understood and her injustice acknowledged. The ritual reached its climax, and the mirror's surface grew still. Elizabeth's image faded, leaving only the faint glow of the candles. Emily felt a profound sense of sadness and relief, knowing she had come close to helping Elizabeth find peace. In the days that followed, Emily shared her findings with the town council and the local historian. Together, they decided to honor Elizabeth's memory and the truth of her story. They established a small museum dedicated to the Bradford family, including the diary and artifacts that Emily had discovered. The mirror was placed in a protective display, a reminder of the house's history and the spirit that had once haunted it. The Bradford house, once again, fell silent. The haunting ceased, and the atmosphere shifted from one of dread to a place of historical reflection. Elizabeth's story was no longer a whisper in the dark but a recognized part of Oakwood's history. And so, the old Victorian stood as a monument to the past, its secrets unveiled and its spirits acknowledged. The mirror remained, a silent witness to a tragic love story and a reminder of the power of remembering and honoring those who had been wronged. Years after the establishment of the Bradford House Museum, Oakwood had become a quaint but thriving town, its ghostly legend now a celebrated part of its heritage. The museum attracted visitors from all over, drawn by the stories of Elizabeth Bradford and the mysterious mirror. The once feared mansion had become a place of fascination, and the story of Elizabeth's plight had turned into a poignant tale of love and loss. One summer, a renowned paranormal researcher named Dr. Robert Fields, known for his work on haunted locations, visited Oakwood. Dr. Fields was intrigued by the Bradford House and its story, particularly the mirror's role in the haunting. He had heard about Emily Parker's findings and was eager to conduct his own investigation to see if there were any lingering phenomena or unresolved aspects of the case. Dr. Fields arrived with his team, equipped with the latest ghost hunting technology. The team included a medium named Lydia, who had a reputation for communicating with spirits, and Jake, a skeptical investigator with a penchant for debunking myths. They spent several days setting up their equipment and interviewing locals to gather more information about the house's history. On the evening of their investigation, the museum was closed to the public, and the team prepared to spend the night in the mansion. The air was thick with anticipation as the team entered the house, the old floorboards creaking under their weight. They started in the living room, where they conducted an initial sweep with electromagnetic field meters and infrared cameras. As the night deepened, Dr. Fields and his team made their way to the attic. Lydia, the medium, began her work, sitting in front of the mirror with her eyes closed, attempting to establish a connection with any spirits present. The atmosphere grew tense, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Lydia's expressions shifted from calm to troubled as she communicated with what she claimed to be a presence. Meanwhile, Jake and Dr. Fields reviewed the data collected by their devices. The EMF meters spiked sporadically, and the infrared cameras captured strange anomalies, shadows moving against the grain of the light and fleeting glimpses of figures. It was clear that something unusual was happening. Lydia's voice broke the silence. "There's someone here," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not just Elizabeth. There's another presence, angry, disturbed. It feels like someone who was wronged deeply." Dr. Fields, intrigued but cautious, asked Lydia to describe the presence. She relayed that the spirit seemed agitated and conflicted, not quite like Elizabeth but connected to the house's dark past. Lydia suggested that this spirit might be a malevolent force that had been linked to Elizabeth's story, possibly someone who had contributed to the tragedy. Determined to find out more, Dr. Fields decided to focus on the mirror, which had been central to the previous hauntings. The team set up additional equipment around the mirror and began a series of electronic voice phenomena sessions, asking questions and recording any responses. As they conducted their investigation, a chilling wind swept through the attic, extinguishing the candles they had lit. The temperature plummeted, and the mirror's surface began to ripple, just as it had during Emily Parker's ritual. This time, however, the reflection was not Elizabeth's but a dark, shadowy figure with a menacing presence. The figure seemed to writhe and distort, its features obscured but its intent clear. It was as though it were trying to reach through the mirror, its shadow stretching toward them. Lydia, visibly shaken, tried to communicate with the figure, but it remained silent, its presence oppressive and foreboding. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the attic, followed by the sound of something heavy falling. The team rushed to investigate and found that an old chest, previously hidden behind the mirror, had toppled over. It was filled with old letters and documents, many of which had been damaged by time. Dr. Fields and Lydia sifted through the papers, finding records that revealed more about the Bradford family's past. The documents included correspondence between Elizabeth and a mysterious figure, an unscrupulous business partner of her husband, who had been involved in a scheme to undermine the Bradfords financially. This partner had conspired to ruin the family and was responsible for some of the turmoil Elizabeth had faced. It became clear that this person had harbored a grudge and had used dark practices to ensure Elizabeth's suffering. This malevolent force was now linked to the house, feeding off the lingering sorrow and anger. With this new information, Dr. Fields and Lydia decided to perform a cleansing ritual to address the malevolent presence and release the trapped spirits. They conducted a thorough ritual, using elements from the documents and incorporating elements from traditional cleansing practices. The mirror was at the center of the ritual, as it was believed to be the focal point of the disturbances. As the ritual concluded, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the temperature returned to normal. The mirror's surface cleared, and the shadowy figure vanished. The team felt a profound shift, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from the house. In the days that followed, Dr. Fields and his team documented their findings and shared their experiences with the town. The Bradford House, now free from its malevolent presence, was given a renewed purpose. The museum continued to honor the Bradford family's story, but now with a sense of closure and peace. Emily Parker returned to Oakwood to assist in curating the new findings and to help preserve the house's legacy. The story of Elizabeth and the dark forces that had once plagued the house became a tale of redemption and resolution, a reminder of the power of uncovering truth and seeking justice. The Bradford House stood as a testament to the endurance of the human spirit and the importance of confronting and resolving the shadows of the past. The mirror, now a symbol of both torment and liberation, was displayed with reverence, its story a central part of Oakwood's history. And so, the tale of the Bradford House became not just a ghost story but a journey of discovery, healing, and ultimately, peace. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you like this story.